Hi, I'm Alex.
And I'm Eddie.
Welcome to the 14th episode of Catch 52, a politics podcast brought to you by WDSR, Duquesne Student Radio.
We are now 38 weeks away from Inauguration Day 2021, and I regret to report we have more campaign news.
Yeah. Well, it's good news and bad news. The good news is there's news this week. The bad news is, well, I don't know if you want to call it bad news or not. But the news that we have to talk about, and the reason why we're recording this on Friday now instead of our usual Thursday is because of what came out yesterday. Is because on Thursday, I believe it was like Thursday at 4:30 in the afternoon, the Biden campaign announced that Joe Biden would be giving a statement on the allegations made against him by one Tara Reid.
Yeah.
And in addition to that statement, he'd be giving a live face-to-face interview to Morning Joe this Friday morning. And surprisingly, it actually hasn't dominated the headlines as much as we would have expected, but it still dominated the headlines enough that it's really important to talk about, and also talking about how a sexual assault accusation is going to impact Biden in the long term is something that a lot of people really, really need to consider, because you have to come to your own conclusion on it. We have to come to our own conclusion on it. And so it's worth diving into in order to establish, why should Biden be even running if this accusation is out there?
Yeah. So just so we can clear this all before we get started, we will be talking about the details. So if that is not good for you, then please don't listen to the rest of this episode. Also, we are two straight white semi-WASP men talking about this issue. So we acknowledge our privilege in the situation, and just know that going forward for the rest of the episode.
That said, we are going to try as hard as we possibly can to stick to the facts where we can find them. And usually that's going to mean that we're going to be quoting directly from Biden's statement, a couple of articles on it, and a really, really well done investigation that was performed by the New York Times.
Yeah. So I think before we get into what happened today, we need to get into the history of this. And the first bit of history I think we should get into is talking about the Me Too movement and the Time's Up movement. So those both hit summer of 2018-ish, or maybe a little bit sooner, summer 2017, I believe. And, working to call out people who have sexually abused, sexually assaulted, or any other form of sexual misconduct on their workers, typically men abusing their positions of power on women. This caught up a lot of celebrities, and in terms of politics, it caught up some minor politicians, but especially most notably involved Democrat Al Franken, who resigned from his seat and is now run by Tina Smith, a woman who he kind of selected.
Yeah. This really, I guess Me Too really caught it. Really, a lot of the people who had to sort of step away from public life because of it were media personalities. But there were definitely some. Al Franken was probably the politician with the highest public profile, who resigned in the wake of his allegations. But I can think of a few other politicians.
Yeah. I mean, Trump was implicated. He has 23 sexual misconduct allegations put on him since the 80s, but he was implicated but not really affected in terms of popularity.
Yes.
That much.
But it's worth noting that Me Too is, of course, it's the power is from the fact that people care about it, and the fact that it's a movement that has kind of outlived a lot of other movements that have kind of fallen by the wayside in the American left. I'm thinking of the Women's March. The first year the Women's March, the first or the second year that the Women's March happened, like I'm thinking it was the second year, but it was like historic numbers of people. Yeah, like millions and millions of people marching. Third year, a good amount less. That was when like Louis Farrakhan got involved, all that stuff. But the Me Too movement has outlived the Women's March. It's outlived other like weird other sort of like causes that the political left has taken on. And the reason is because it's super legit and it impacts everybody, and a lot of people have a lot of opinions about it.
Yeah, I think it kind of goes without saying that regardless of where you are politically, the fact that people who have been sexually abused are being held accountable is a good thing. Oftentimes,
The people who are sexually abusing other people.
So people who are sexual abusers are being held accountable and are being, given the treatment they deserve. That said, a lot of the arguments in politics come from to what extent the evidence and the claims should be honored. And typically, I'd say up until about a month ago, the Republican side had typically been saying we need a lot more evidence. We need to give the accused, so the alleged abuser, we need to give them the benefit of the doubt because this is a society built on innocent until proven guilty. And then the left argued that we should believe the woman because the odds are stacked against them here, and we can't have sexual predators on the, out in the open still, even after a public allegation has been filed. And so those have kind of been the two areas of belief on the issue, generally.
And the sort of clash comes when we try to combine the two realms of debate. A lot of these claims, because of the fact that they were brought up, long after the fact that they happened, or the fact that they're difficult to corroborate in some instances, those aspects of a lot of the allegations have meant that a lot of them wouldn't hold water in a court of law. That said, that doesn't mean that they didn't happen. And this brings us to sort of the second court, if you will, which is the court of politics, the arena of public opinion. And so regardless of whether or not you can be proven that you are innocent or guilty in a court of law, it's more of a question of the fact that these allegations are coming out at all. What does that say about this person? And as individuals now, we have like a sort of personal responsibility. Like we as voters are sort of the judge and jury. Like we have to make up for our mind, because if you think that, if you think that this person on the ballot, regardless of what you think about their policies, is a sexual assailant, is a rapist, it's very, very difficult for you to justify voting for that person. Mm-hmm. At least in my opinion, it's difficult to justify that.
And the reason that in the political realm it is a different process, to quote Mitch McConnell, it's a political process, talking about impeachment, but also you could say that very much applies to any of the allegations that have occurred in recent memory. The biggest political case up until probably right now has been Brett Kavanaugh.
Yep.
So I'm sure you guys all remember Dr. Christine Blasey Ford coming forward saying that he sexually assaulted her at a dorm party in high school, at a high school party.
House party in high school.
Yeah, at a house party in high school, which was, I think, 25 or 30 years before she came forward with the allegation. She sent a letter to her congressperson, who forwarded that to Dianne Feinstein, who sat on it for about 2 months and then brought it forward after Kavanaugh was selected as the nominee. And then obviously there was a lot of debate over the merit of her claim, with Democrats arguing that we should believe the woman, with the Republicans saying there's not enough evidence.
Yep.
And Kavanaugh got confirmed along a party line vote.
There you go. This is definitely, that was definitely the most public version of this. Mm-hmm. But now sort of, that was definitely the most jarring example of when this issue was really split along party lines, because you had the vast majority of Democrats saying that regardless of whether this can be proven in a court of law, the fact that it's coming up and is coming up in this amount of detail, and the fact that this woman is willing to expose herself to, ridicule, vitriol, death threats. The fact that she's willing to do this means that there definitely has to be some credibility to her claims. Why would she go public with it? Like, what's the point? And so it was really, I guess it was really explosive. And the aftermath of those hearings, I think, has sort of like simmered in how a lot of people think about the Me Too movement now going forward. And in the way I saw it, the Kavanaugh hearings kind of underwrote the Me Too movement, and it was a really depressing way of doing that, because it was a signal that the Me Too movement like had not succeeded.
At least to the extent that people had hoped it would.
Yeah.
But that brings us to now, because a lot of the arguments that the Democrats are used about Kavanaugh are being used by Republicans about this allegation with Biden. Oftentimes, probably not with complete honest intent. We'll get into that later, of the messaging behind it. But first off, let's just talk about the allegations themselves.
Yeah.
So Tara Reade alleges that in 1993, in the spring of 1993, Joe Biden, while she was delivering athletic equipment to Joe Biden, who pinned her in the, or let's just say real quick, trigger warning, we are going to say exactly what happened allegedly. So she alleges that Biden pinned her up against the wall, reached under her shirt, and then used his leg to spread her legs open and reached under her skirt. Then she pushed him away, and he yelled at her, said, "You're nothing to me," and walked away. That is the alleged incident.
Yeah. Actually, I just want to get exactly what happened.
Yeah.
From the Times account, because there's a little bit more to it. So, Mr. Biden, to quote the New York Times investigation, Mr. Biden pinned her to a wall in a Senate building, reached under her clothing, penetrated her with his fingers. A friend said that Ms. Reade told her the details of the allegation at the time. And then after that, where is this? Yeah, after that, basically Biden stepped away and said, "What's wrong? I thought you liked me." And then he looked at me kind of puzzled. And this is what she's saying when she was interviewed. He looked at me kind of almost puzzled or shocked, she said. And he said, "Come on, man. I heard you liked me." He pointed his finger at me. This is Tara Reade speaking. And he just goes, "You're nothing to me. Nothing," she said. And then he took my shoulders and said, "You're okay. You're fine." End quote.
Yeah. So this whole scenario does have very strong echoes to the Kavanaugh incident. It was multiple decades ago. It was, I mean, obviously it's different in the sense that Biden at the time was one of the top-ranking senators in the U.S. Senate. But other than that, it happened a long time ago. There is some corroboration from people that they know and some non-corroboration among people that they know. There is not much evidence for either side. It's very similar in all events. And following, if we are to be consistent with the Me Too movement, we are to give Tara Reade the benefit of the doubt in this situation and believe her claim until proven otherwise.
Mm-hmm. So I think so. If we're going with the Me Too movement perspective and we're going to believe Tara Reade, we're going to give her the benefit of the doubt, then what's going on? All right. Because all of these prominent women, most of whom are probably trying to be vice presidential candidates, admittedly, but all these prominent women in the Democratic Party are coming out and saying, this isn't Joe Biden. This is false. Joe Biden has all of these female staffers, all of these, a handful of prominent female celebrities. Alyssa Milano, who kind of like jump-started the Me Too movement itself, was like, actually, basically, I don't want to say that they started using Republican talking points because I don't think that's what happened, and I think that there's honest intent here. But what started to happen is they're saying, okay, we need to look into the story. We need to look at this claim.
Even Kirsten Gillibrand came out in favor of Joe Biden, and Kirsten Gillibrand was very much the Kickstarter of the Me Too movement in the political process.
Yep.
She was the one that pressed the rest of the Democratic Party to kick Al Franken off of his seat, which she was successful on. So she is kind of the political leader of the Me Too movement.
And so it's a question of, is this just a political double standard? And if that's the perspective that you have, well, we've got some we've got some thoughts. Or is it a political double standard, or is there something that is fundamentally different about this case that is leading all of these prominent female figures in politics and in social society to kind of change their tune here?
So I think the only way that we can really come close to an answer, and the answer right now is that there's no answer. Because it doesn't seem to all add up, but also we don't have all the information, so we can't say whether or not this is or will be ever fully concludable, definitely.
That's the thing. It definitely
won't. Honestly, that we can never confirm nor deny most of these sexual assault claims, especially Kavanaugh. So I think personally, if you, right when you heard the story, were inept to believe that this is just a ploy, then that should have also been your reaction during Kavanaugh, or vice versa. That if you heard, oh, well, Kavanaugh has an allegation against him, I believe the woman, that should be your initial reaction before you know any of the other things regarding the situation. Your initial reaction should still be, okay, well, this is a sexual assault allegation and it needs to be taken seriously. So,
and I honestly, to just full disclosure, because when I saw that notification the first time, that CNN pings my phone and says Joe Biden has a sexual assault allegation, and it's not just from a woman saying that he invaded her personal space. Like, this is real. My gut reaction was like, okay, I kind of thought this might have been coming. Like, it just, I don't. There's been so many. Like, I didn't expect it, but it was, when I read it, I was like, okay, this is credible. I believe it. That was my gut reaction.
Yeah, like I definitely had the same thing where you see it and you're like, all right, sure, let's look into it. But I think the bias on my end, at least, I think I can probably speak for a lot of people, but the bias is like, oh, well, I certainly hope that this isn't true. But again, like, it's I'd much rather it be true and corroborated than untrue.
Yeah.
Like, I'd much rather just the truth come out more than anything else.
Yeah, because that would make this much easier. And of course, when the accounts conflict, then we can't just agree on what the truth is. And so here we are. I guess because of the very, like, the surface level facts, like, that's where we get our gut feeling from. Because when you read the headline, it was probably something like, Tara Reid, a former staffer. Okay, so they would have had a relationship, professional, at some point, alleges that she was sexually assaulted by former vice president and presumptive presidential nominee Joe Biden when she worked for him in 1993. So it's like, okay, boom, it says her name. Number two, it establishes clearly that they had a working professional relationship that would have made this, like, legitimate. And three, it happened decades ago. Like, it's
all very similar to Kavanaugh. And the same way you'd say, well, why would Dr. Ford do this? Sure, she might not politically like him, but, like, why would she subject herself to this public eye? You need to be asking the same questions about Tara Reid. Why is she putting herself under this public scrutiny if she at least didn't believe this to be true? Like, yeah. So let's talk about Biden's interview this morning. He went on Morning Joe, and everyone else left except for Mika. So it was only Mika interviewing Joe. I think especially because the two other people that were on the line were two men. So it was just Mika directly talking to Joe.
Yeah.
And Mika did
it was a good
job.
vibe.
She did a very good job of drilling Biden and really making sure she got everything she could out of him.
And then I think right after that, she, like, kicked it to a panel discussion, and I thought it was a really, really well done segment. I have lots of things to say about Morning Joe, but this was probably one of the better bits that they've done. And then not only that, but it actually fit within this. See, because this is why it was weird, and I don't know if this is true, but it's in a really cynical way. It might be, because as part of that panel, Mika Brzezinski was bringing up old clips of how Morning Joe covered the Kavanaugh hearing, and Joe Scarborough, he didn't say one way or the other whether he thought it was true, but it was constantly. But the show's main theme, when the whole firestorm erupted, was criticizing the way that Democrats, far left Democrats, as Morning Joe does, criticizing the way that far left Democrats were treating Brett Kavanaugh. It makes a little bit of sense why the Biden campaign might think that might be a safer environment to have that happen.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think that Mika Brzezinski did a fantastic job. It fit within the continuity of how the show has covered previous issues. Say what you will about how that coverage has been, it was consistent. And then on top of that, she did press him.
Yeah. So he did ultimately deny all of these allegations, and we have this quote from him. Well, the details of this allegations of sexual harassment and sexual assault are complicated. Two things are not complicated. One is that women deserve to be treated with dignity and respect, and when they step forward, they should be heard, not silenced.
So let's just stop right there, because there's some really important phrasing that women should not be silenced. That is actually the key aspect of the Me Too movement, the key aspect of all of the organizing that has surrounded that. And I think that's been lost as the movement has progressed, that it primarily initially was about listening to women, listening to the allegations rather than dismissing them without giving them a chance. And so I've seen a lot of talking heads mention that line today. Yeah. And saying that it fits within the continuity of the Me Too movement. So it's it was a really.
Yeah. What Biden has been stressing is, like, he's not saying that she doesn't deserve to be heard or that her claim doesn't deserve to be looked into, but he's just saying that he denies. Yeah. So basically he's saying, I don't believe her claim to be, he's saying, I know her claim is not true, but you can still look into it. I'm not going to silence anyone.
Exactly. And this is a really,
I think is the best response you can have if you are someone in favor of Me Too who gets alleged for this. But anyways, moving on. The second is that their stories should always be subjected to appropriate inquiry and scrutiny. There is a clear critical part of the story that can be verified. The former staffer has said she has filed a complaint back in 1993. But she does not have a record of the alleged complaint. The papers from my Senate that I donated to the University of Delaware do not contain personnel files. It is the practice of senators to establish a library of personal papers that document their public record, speeches, policy proposals, positions taken, and the writing of bills. There is only one place a complaint of this kind could be: the National Archives. The National Archives is where records are kept and are kept at what was then called the Office of Fair Employment Practices. I am requesting that the Secretary of the Senate ask the archives to identify any record of the complaint if she alleges she filed, and make available to the press any such document. If there ever was any such complaint, the record will be there. So he called on the National Archives to basically just Control F this complaint, pull it up if there is one, and publish it. Mika in the interview was asking him, well, would you allow someone to search your record with at the University of Delaware? And he seemed just kind of confused as to the question. He didn't really have an answer. He just kind of said, well, it won't be there, so you don't need to do it. Which it just, judging from the interview, seemed a lot more like he didn't really understand what the question was, and a lot less like he was trying to cover something up. And I'm sure in the next day or two they will approve that search. Just if nothing else for the publicity and saving face of it.
Yeah. I don't think a lot of universities are hoping to be sort of accused of, partisan, this kind of outward partisan politics. Here's the interesting thing. So in addition to the fact that the statement was sort of padded by this Me Too language, Not only was it a statement that basically it was an unequivocal denial, but it also then opened the door for further investigation. And this is, I think, why the Biden statement, I don't want to say this like as a rule, as a thought that like this is how it's going to be in the future, but this might be the version of like a statement or an approach that a public figure can take when either, number one, the claim is false, but they don't want to, just
outright
completely dismiss it because of everything that we've talked about. Or, if you are being incredibly cynical about it, if, you want to sort of try and bury the claim. But just outright not talking about it, outright saying this isn't true, and then like just leaving it there, that, I mean, it worked for Trump, but like when you're working within the field of like left-wing politics and, like human decency, you have to give it a little bit more credibility. So this could be a format for how it gets addressed in a more healthy way. I'm definitely not the person to decide whether this was a good way to address it or not, but it feels like this is a step in the right direction.
Yeah, and this is definitely something where Biden differentiated himself from Kavanaugh. So Kavanaugh did provide his calendars from the time, which ultimately I don't think served him very well because they found some other fun stuff in there, like the Devil's Triangle, which was the alleged drinking game. But there's
a difference between personal calendars and National Archive files.
Yeah, and
so one of those is, legit.
Yeah, the thing is, Kavanaugh didn't really have many other places for evidence to be or not be, but his reaction was, this didn't happen. Here's like my short form diary to prove it. Whereas Biden's reaction is, this hasn't happened. Let's check the public files and see. And I think that is a significant difference. That is at least a little bit more credible for Biden. I don't think that proves or disproves anything at all.
Absolutely.
But the good thing to see is at least it's not an outright categorical denial. It's a categorical denial with an attempt at showing some evidence.
Exactly. And not only that, but there's actually there's a clear and concise explanation for the sort of for any kind of upcoming investigation. So not only is it a definitive call for more information, so I'm calling on the National Archives, a clear direction saying that like this is where this investigation is going to go. And not only that, but the statement explains why he's calling on the National Archives, because as the statement says, that's the only place personnel records would be.
Yeah.
Which is, and this is where this becomes even more challenging, because now, okay, we have, on one hand, we have a credible allegation, and then on the other hand, now we have a really, really well worded denial. And I know that like a denial should not mean anything, especially in this context. But it's a denial and an honest call for more information.
Yeah, with a denial with a call for evidence, which is something we haven't really seen in the past. The reason we didn't see Al Franken react like that is because the allegation was published alongside pictures of him groping her. So, there was a pretty open shut case on Franken, whereas here there's, it's really just going to be a wait and see for the National Archives.
That's the thing. Maybe there will be evidence. Maybe there will be a file in the National Archives that is saying something.
So in the meantime, there is some corroboration and some discorroboration, I guess you would say. So on the pro Reed side of things, there are friends of hers and her family that says they remember her talking to her about this
and
when it happened.
Yeah. So her brother has come out publicly. Some friends, none of her friends she has no friends that like lived with her in DC at the time that have come out and said anything. But she, after leaving the Hill, she moved to California. And a handful of her personal friends in California have spoken up on her behalf.
Yeah.
The other notable instance of when this, and if you want to call it piece of evidence, that corroborates the story, that corroborates the account, is
Larry King call.
the Larry King phone call.
Yeah.
So in 1993, and this just recently surfaced on an episode of Larry King Live when he was still on CNN. Tara Reid basically has brought this up and said, my mother actually called into the show, and there's a clip. It's everywhere. You can look it up.
They found the clip. They have not confirmed where this call came from, if it's the mother.
Yes.
Essentially, the clip said, my daughter was sexually assaulted by a notable U.S. senator, but hasn't said anything because she doesn't want to implicate him, or something along those lines.
Hasn't gone public. Basically, she tried to have like a complaint filed, and then the complaint like didn't go through, or something didn't happen, or it was dismissed. And then the caller, presumably the mother, said, the only other way that I can think of to deal with this is to go public, but my daughter doesn't want to go public out of respect for the senator.
Mm-hmm. So that's the evidence for. The evidence against so far is that the staffers, campaign workers, and anyone else that was with Biden at the time said that they had no memory of this. The person all the people that she would have reported to said that they have no memory of this happening, and they wouldn't see this happening. They remember her, and they would have remembered if something like that would have happened.
Yeah, and not only that, but you have many of these people coming out, not only and saying, I don't remember this happening, but then coming out and firmly speaking on Biden's behalf as sort of like, like impromptu character references. There's a really telling quote that I'm trying to find, and it talks about, it's a former staffer who worked with Ms. Reid at the time, and it talks about, like, here we go. So this particular, and I'm quoting from the Times investigation. So this quote comes from Melissa Lefko, a former staff assistant for Biden from 1992 to 1993. She said she didn't remember Miss Reid, so that's notable. But she recalls that Mr. Biden's office was a very supportive environment for women, and she said she had never experienced any kind of harassment there. And this is the quote. When you work on the Hill, everyone knows who the good guys are and who the bad guys are. Biden was a good guy, a guy who basically had a reputation for trying to get home on his train as quickly as possible. I feel like that is a really good, like, short summary of the kind of person that I can see Biden being in the 90s.
Yeah, but again, we don't know. I mean, if you look at like Matt Lauer was implicated in Me Too, resigned from his job, and he was seen as a good guy who did a lot for charity and did a lot for people who needed a lot of help, but also sexually assaulted people.
Yep.
And that's the big problem here. And in terms of what personally, in our straight right male privilege opinions, personally, I am withholding judgment so far. All the evidence has come off very conflicting pro and con. So where I am right now, I am still neutral, and when it comes to being neutral, you have to give the woman the benefit of the doubt. So that's personally where I am right now. I would love to see more evidence, especially more details about the actual event or day of. There are some questions that I really have. She was working in a Senate office building. I know all the Senate office buildings. There are not many private hallways at all.
So the quote that Eddie's referencing, let me see if I can find this. So it occurred so Miss Reid said that she could not remember the exact time or date or location of the assault, but that it occurred in a semi-private place located in the Senate office complex.
So the Senate office complex is 3 buildings that are connected by underground tunnels. The office buildings themselves all have big, wide hallways. The one Biden, I'd say, was most likely in, is the oldest one there, and it is all marble. The thing about that, I've walked around there, it echoes. It whispers echo. So it almost definitely did not happen there, or else someone would have heard something. The other 2 office buildings are open plan buildings. So all the hallways lead to a common courtyard. So again, semi-private's not necessarily the best way to describe that. The two places where I think it might have been able to happen in the semi-private places are the above ground and below ground tunnels that connect the office buildings. So the, what are they? The Hart and, I forget the name of the other one. Hart and Russell. No, Russell's the old one. Hart and Durkinson connect to each other. They're built like right next to each other, and they connect each other through a couple of small stairways and hallways. Those are a lot more private than the rest of it, so that's definitely a place where it could happen. So that's not me saying, well, she didn't say where it is, so it didn't happen. I'm just saying that I see very few places it could happen. So it's there, and then also there's the underground area, which are the underground tunnels that connect all those buildings to all the other buildings in the congressional complex. I personally feel like if it was in the tunnels, you'd remember that because it's a pretty vivid in there. It's very much more dimly lit. And so obviously it could happen there, but I think that might have been somewhere where you'd remember. Obviously I can't say whether or not that's the truth because also it happened 25 years ago, and oftentimes people, don't want to remember that stuff, so they forget a lot of it subconsciously. And so again, not me saying that it didn't happen. I'm right now leaning towards believing her, but I want to know more about that. The other thing that gives me the most doubt outside of any of the anyone else saying that is that she said she was wearing a skirt at the time, which again, Senate dress codes especially are super strict. You only wear jeans on Fridays. Any other time you have to have your legs covered, whether you're a man or a woman. Obviously, I don't know if that was the dress code in the 90s, but I doubt that it's gotten more strict since then. That said, it could have very well been at the end of the day. A lot of people change out of their work clothes before they leave, and that would also explain why she might have been giving athletic equipment to Senator Biden. But again, I just feel like that would be a detail you'd remember if it was at the very end of the day right before you went home. So again, I can't say whether or not that's just like my brain being cynical about this and my bias feeding in there, but there are some holes in the details that I'd like to just know more about. But generally, I do think that because there's no evidence that proves or disproves anything, I am inclined to believe her. That
is the constant struggle in this case.
Mm-hmm.
I come out as like true neutral, whereas it's definitely it's slightly more problematic for me to say this out loud. I guess it's like if the way I saw it, I was entirely unsure, where I thought it was like there was like an even playing field of the facts that were presented. I would, like you, be on the side of, okay, let's believe the woman here, because again, there's all of these, like, the amount of effort, the amount of trauma that a person goes through to go public with these claims. Like, why would you do it if it was fake? I am in a position right now where I see more evidence supporting Biden's argument, but I am also, because I am inclined to believe a woman who's gone public, I'm not sure. So it levels out equally for me in that sense.
Yeah.
So even though I see more evidence on Biden's side, I'm giving credibility to the allegation because it's a public allegation. And that's why I'm not saying it's like, oh, well, I believe Biden. I don't believe Biden. I have no idea who to believe. And I myself have to wait for more evidence to come out. And it's a really weird and awkward and kind of depressing position to be in, because I wish I could have something where I was like, okay, I can point to that, and that is going to, help me come to a decision one way or another, but I really can't. Yeah.
What I will say is, now that Biden has responded, the ball is much more in Tara Reade's court than it is in his, because if the archives show something, then I think it's pretty much a closed case on Biden. If there was if there was a complaint, then I believe Tara Reade wholeheartedly. I do.
Yep.
If there's no complaint, I lean very heavily towards believing Biden.
At the same time, though,
it
is entirely possible, because per Tara Reid's account,
Mhm.
the complaint like really didn't go anywhere. So it might even there probably so I don't want to say there probably was a complaint, but like if there was a complaint, it may not have even been filed correctly.
Yeah, that's why I'm saying if there isn't a complaint, I'm not saying I will outright believe Biden, but I'm saying that's a lot more credence to him. But I think if there is a complaint, Biden should not be the Democratic nominee in the fall.
Yep. And then this podcast gets a lot more interesting.
That's the very cynical way of looking at it. But I think that...
It's not a good thing.
No, I think that as it stands right now, it's just waiting on the National Archives.
Yep.
But while everyone's waiting, we've been seeing a lot of spinning politically. And this is what really, really angers me. So we try and stay as bipartisan as possible on the show. But what we have seen in this past week is Republicans using Democratic talking points against them. Normally, that's fine. That's great. But it's the same Republicans who railed against these Republican talking points or these Democratic talking points for 3 years and are now so happy to use them because it benefits them. It just does not come off as honest at all to hear like Lindsey Graham and Ted Cruz saying we have to believe women. It does not come off as good. And that just like it just leads me to this thing where the Democrats should not be believing Joe Biden right away. And the Republicans, while they should be believing the woman right away, should not be yelling at the Democrats for not, because they are the ones that got Brett Kavanaugh elected or appointed to the Supreme Court. And that just like, it leads me to the people that are, the Me Too movement is not only aimed to stop sexual predators, but it's aimed to stop people who enable sexual predators to continue their actions. And so if you are excited that this allegation came out against Biden, if you're excited that someone was sexually assaulted, you are part of the problem. And if you think that when you first heard this claim that, automatically it's less valid than when Dr. Ford came forward, you're part of the problem. If you think it's less valid or more valid, you are part of the problem, because you need to be giving every woman equal credence in the situation. If when you first heard the claim that you were like, well, he's a Democrat, so it must not be true, or it must be true, again, you're part of the problem. And if you think this should disqualify Trump, or if you think that this should disqualify Biden and you still plan on voting for Trump in the fall, you are a huge part of the problem.
Way to get ahead of yourself there.
Let me put it this way. No sexual predator should be the nominee for president, especially not the Democrat. But if you were undecided between Trump versus Biden, heard this news, and are now voting Trump over Biden,
that's pretty hilarious.
It is completely paradoxical, considering Trump has 23 times the number of sexual misconduct allegations on him.
Well, Biden had 8 women come out and basically said that he was like, but they weren't sexual assault.
They were.
I don't know if they were.
They
were misconduct.
It was unfair treatment. They said, it's different circumstances because some of Trump's allegations are full on rape. Some of them are inappropriate touching, like the 8 against Biden were, but a lot of them are much, much worse than that.
Yep.
Trump also has the Access Hollywood tape, which is him outright saying, "I'm famous. They'll let you do whatever you want. They will let you grab them by their pussy."
It's easy how it's crazy how quickly we forget.
Yeah.
Things like the Access Hollywood tape when the president's telling us to drink bleach.
Yeah. So like that's the thing, is the only thing you can do in this situation is be consistent. While ideally your consistency would be on the benefit of the women accused, you cannot suddenly pretend to have been a part of this movement this whole time and suddenly pretend to uphold the values that this movement has upheld for 3 years just because it benefits your political party.
Thus,
if you want to give all women equal credence, then by all means, let's do it. That sounds great. But that means let's do a full investigation into this whole Biden business. And if he's implicated, kick him out. He should not be in the public eye anymore.
Yeah.
But the same thing goes for Trump. Let's also investigate those 23.
Excuse me.
It's the ideal situation is if both of these are true, the ideal situation is that neither of them are the nominee. But I'm just going to ask this question to the viewers. If it's proven both that Biden sexually assaulted someone and Trump sexually assaulted someone, do you see both of them not running again, or do you just see Biden not running?
Well, that question pretty clearly answers itself, I think. But hey, that's just me. I'd love to see a coherent argument for why Trump would drop out in light of in light of what he sees as credible sexual assault allegations. I would love to see that.
So,
okay. Let's not this. So glad you got that off your chest.
Yeah.
Let's not establish
my weekly rant.
Exactly. Let's not establish moral equivalency here. Okay. Mm-hmm. Sure. At a certain level, numbers do matter.
But the thing is, so
the amount of times you do something is important.
An allegation is an allegation, but 2 allegations are not an allegation. Like
there are 2 allegations.
Exactly. So the fact that Kavanaugh had about 6 allegations, or at least 4 that were written in the New Yorker by the time he was confirmed, is a big deal. And obviously time will tell. Maybe more will come out about Biden. And I think every time there's another case, it just becomes more believable.
That's absolutely true. Yeah. And here's the interesting thing about some of the Biden's other cases. So Biden has this one case of sexual assault. The other ones are of sexual misconduct. As part of the Times investigation, they actually interviewed a Nevada state assemblywoman who is one of those women who accused Biden of sexual misconduct. Mm-hmm. Her name is Lucy Flores. She's now, I guess, a former Nevada state assemblywoman. And she accused Joe Biden of making her uncomfortable with kissing and touching in a 2014 campaign event. Ugh. Okay.
Yeah.
Beside that, she ended up exchanging emails with Tara Reade last year, but said that Reade did not share her full story. And this is a direct quote from Lucy Flores. Biden is not just a hugger. Biden very clearly was invading women's spaces without their consent in a way that made them feel uncomfortable. Does he potentially have the capacity to go beyond that? That's the answer that everyone is trying to get at.
Yeah. Yeah. It's right now, only time can tell, and you have to be consistent in your beliefs. Regardless of the side of the aisle you're on. If you're a Democrat, then you should not be automatically dismissing this allegation as a Republican ploy, because that's exactly what the Republicans did in 2017 that angered all the Democrats, or in 2018 with Kavanaugh. If you are a Republican, you are free to change your mind and join the Me Too movement.
You're not allowed to use Democratic talking points only when it's against Democrats.
But that's what I was getting at. You can please, by all means, join the Me Too movement, but stay in the Me Too movement when Donald Trump has another allegation come against him, and stay in the Me Too movement when a Republican senator has one come up against him, and stay in that movement when Bill O'Reilly gets accused or any other, notable Republican gets accused. There just has to be consistency, and there has been inconsistency on both sides.
That is true. I think there are definitely a lot of left-leaning Democrats who are looking at this and seeing, yep, see, here we go again with the DCCC and DNC nonsense. Line all of the partisan hacks up and have them defend Joe Biden, regardless of the fact that they're women. I think there are a lot of people who are on the left wing who have that perspective. And I mean, number one, hey, at least it's consistent, like we've been saying.
Yeah.
But number two, let's not. There are enough Democrats who are saying it and saying it loudly that I don't want to discount them. Are you willing to have that perspective and discount Stacey Abrams? Are you willing to have that perspective and discount Kirsten Gillibrand? Yeah. Are you willing to have that perspective, a perspective that is at odds with dozens of Biden's former staffers, many of the women? Are you willing to have that? That's the thing.
And
the credibility of one over the credibility of, it's not just the credibility of one, but at the end of the day, it is the credibility of one over a narrative of accounts put together by many people that do not necessarily tell the whole story, but volume matters at a certain point, and it matters in the realm of politics.
Again, talking about volume, like you mentioned earlier, there is not a moral equivalency. Sexual assault is bad, but 23 sexual assaults is far, far worse. Yep. The most likely scenario right now is that we're not going to have a definite answer going into November about this.
There's no way we will.
And the most likely thing about that is that it's going to be Biden versus Trump on the ticket. And if you're voting for a candidate that will advance the rights of women, and you are left-leaning, and you do not vote for Biden, that is enabling Trump to win. And
you just got some hard questions to ask yourself.
It's incredibly not ideal that both candidates will be running with sexual assault records. It's probably the least ideal thing you can have candidates share something on. If candidates are to share anything, hopefully it's not that both of them are alleged sexual assailants. But in that scenario, would you vote for candidate A, who has 23 sexual assaults, or candidate B, who has, 1 to 9 sexual assaults? Again, both of those are awful, horrible. But one has worked his life, and one has worked a majority of his political career to advance the rights of women. One of them authored the Violence Against Women Act.
The other one authored the Miss Universe pageant.
Yeah, the other one owns Miss Universe. So like they're both are awful, but there's not a moral equivalency between the two. And it sucks to say, because we shouldn't have to be saying that there's not a moral equivalency, because it should be that people who have sexually assaulted a woman or a man or whomever should not be running for office and should not be in the public eye. But that's not the world we live in yet, unfortunately. Yet. But if you want to work to that being the world we live in, if that's your ideal world, you're probably not going to be a Trump supporter, and you probably don't want Trump to win again in 2020.
That's the whole story.
Yeah.
I think that's all there is to say about that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what else to say. Like, just be consistent in your beliefs. And
if you've watched the podcast through this point, and I understand that this is definitely like a much darker topic, that is really, really hard to cover. Again, especially for straight white men.
Yes.
And if you've got like an issue with something that we've said, or the way we've said it, or anything really that's been said in this episode beyond all episodes, please let us know, not just so that we can fix it for ourselves in the future, but so that we can like provide that we can say, like on our Facebook page, like redact a certain statement, provide context for things like this beyond most, if not all other issues, is where we have to be completely honest about how we see it and completely
our privilege in the situation.
Exactly. And accurately represent the facts as we are able to. Again, just to clarify, the whole thing that we've been drawing from is exclusively Biden's statement that he released, the interview he did with Mika Brzezinski, and the New York Times investigation, which we will be linking to in the comment section or in the description of this episode. Yeah.
So please tell us if you want to have your voice heard in this situation. We would love to hear from any of our female viewers or any of our viewers who might have gone through a similar experience or anything like that. Just please, like, if just let us know if there's something you would like us to clarify or apologize for, anything like that, because we have not been through these scenarios. We don't have the same experiences, and we don't know what it's like to be a woman or to go through this. So that said, our time is just about up for this evening.
The intro and outro music, as always, is by Paul Abrams and Rock Solid Panda, and produced by Elise Duda.
And you can find a recording of this podcast and any of our other podcasts on our YouTube channel, Catch52, or on our Facebook, Catch52, and also on our Instagram and Twitter at 52catch. You can also use those to stay updated on air times, episode topics, any of our clips from these shows. We probably won't have too many from this one just because of the topic. And any upcoming guests we might have, which hopefully will be some soon.
Yes. We welcome your comments, your feedback, your suggestions, especially this episode. And have a good Friday and a great weekend.